everyone, I'm Abbie Garcia, and I'm your host for Thoughts on That, a podcast where we dissect everything and everything under the sun. Basically, we talk about our thoughts and what do these thoughts mean to us and what do they mean in regards to society. And today's show, we are joined by me. Yep, it's just me today, folks, Abbie Garcia, and I'd like to talk about compassion, specifically self-compassion. And so a few questions I'd like to pose about it is, why is it good for us? However, why is it so hard for us to practice self-compassion? And so these are some things I'd like to delve in today. So let's start off with the definition of compassion. According to Merriam-Webster, compassion is sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. What I get from that definition is that you understand and you're kind to others when they fail or make mistakes, rather than judging them harshly. And I think the same goes for self-compassion, is we need to take that empathy and that kindness for others and thrust it upon ourselves. All right, now that we have that definition, I'd like to look at another definition by Oxford Languages of what compassion is. So, compassion is sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortune of others, according to Oxford Languages. And looking at that definition, I think that's one of the reasons why we have so much trouble with compassion, let alone self-compassion, is that lots of folks associate compassion with sympathetic pity for other people. The same goes for the self as well, in terms of practicing compassion. If they associate compassion with self-pity, then they're not going to be kind to themselves. They're not going to take the time to take space for their mistakes and say that it's okay. And so, yeah, I think that's why a lot of people have issues with compassion and self-compassion, is that they see it as a way to be soft, that if you hold kindness for yourself and if you are okay about your mistakes, then you're too soft on yourself and you're too soft for society. And, in this world, we're so conditioned to be hard on ourselves, to, like capitalism, to work hard for the product, to have a tough skin, have a tough face, because the world is harsh. And yeah, it's true that the world is hard, that it's a dog-eat-dog world, but that should be all the more reason to practice self-compassion, to take that care for yourself and to grow as a person. According to mindful.org, people who practice self-compassion regularly have a greater sense of well-being and have a greater sense of happiness, life satisfaction, and motivation, as well as better relationships and physical health. And according to Harvard Business Review, people with high levels of self-compassion demonstrate 3 behaviors. First, they are kind rather than judgmental about their own failures and mistakes. Secondly, they recognize that failures are a shared human experience. And lastly, they take a balanced approach to negative emotions when they stumble or fall short. However, they don't let negative emotions take over. So they can feel bad and recognize that they feel bad in that current moment, but they don't let it dictate everything in their life. And by adopting these behaviors, self-compassionate people are more likely to develop a growth mindset. And so I'd like to talk about my own story. Self-compassion did not come easily for me. It's definitely something I've had to develop. And self-compassion did not really come into my sphere, into my realm, until I started training as a yoga teacher. And that was because in yoga, we have to learn about the 8 limbs of yoga. And so the 8 limbs of yoga comes from Patanjali's sutras. And Patanjali is a sage who wrote the Yoga Sutras. And within the 8 limbs of yoga, they're basically steps that act as a guideline on how to live a more meaningful and purposeful life. And so specifically within the 8 limbs of yoga, there are the yamas and niyamas, which are like the 10 commandments of how to live a good, purposeful life as a yogi. And within that, there's ahimsa, which is nonviolence, and compassion. And it's important to practice compassion within our yogi practice, is because we're constantly learning how to mold our bodies and how to breathe properly And that's something that doesn't come overnight, and we can't beat ourselves up for it. And by practicing compassion with our practice, we're a lot more patient and we're a lot more likely to achieve the goals that we want to reach. For example, there's this really hard pose that I'm working on. And it's sometimes I beat myself up for it, for not being as flexible, for always trying every day and not still getting to that point with that pose. However, I've started to really practice self-compassion and to notice that it's okay that I'm not there yet, that I can't reach to that limb just yet. And by practicing that every day, I'm realizing that I'm gradually making progress with myself. And so by practicing self-compassion in my physical yoga practice, I've basically developed a growth mindset within my daily life as well. For example, I found that I've been less harsh on myself on work-related things in terms of class or teaching or in terms of self-projects as well. And so by taking the time to say that it's okay and say that I'm not perfect and whatever mistake I've had, it's just a mistake that I'll learn from it, I've been able to see the greater purpose in life. I've been able to see the greater value in myself, that I'm always growing and that, pain is part of the process. And I think a lot of people are aware of that already, that, pain, no gain. Pain is part of the process. But we also really need to emphasize that we're doing the work already. We don't get enough credit for just showing up. And that is a lot in itself. Like, take it for now, especially during COVID times. It's so hard just to exist. And we need to recognize that we're doing our best in such unprecedented times, that whatever we're doing, as long as it's not harming anyone or ourselves, hopefully, it's good enough. We just need to be patient with ourselves and take it slow, take it day by day. And with self-compassion, I've also realized that a huge part of practicing it is being mindful of ourselves and being mindful of everything around us and not being so quick to categorize something as bad or good. Because I think also in our society, we like to have a binary on things. It helps us with control, right? But it definitely doesn't help some situations. Like, not every experience has to be bad or good. We can just acknowledge that an experience is just an experience, that it's there for us to grow from, that it's there for us to just realize something about ourselves or others, or, sometimes we don't even have to realize something from it. It could just be there. And so by practicing mindfulness and awareness in self-compassion, it'll be a lot easier to move on to the next thing and not let a certain emotion weigh us down, or not let a certain emotion become something that we're addicted to. And that's why I think mindfulness and compassion, self-compassion, go hand in hand, because mindfulness is essentially a non-judgmental, receptive way to identify things. And same goes with self-compassion. We need to come from a non-judgmental place, as well as a caring place, to take space and to heal from whatever we're dealing with at that moment. And so the question a lot of folks are asking, maybe even you're asking, how do we practice self-compassion? How do we implement a growth mindset? How can we grow as nicer human beings to ourselves for a more fulfilling life? And so some ways I practice self-compassion is being more mindful of how I speak to others and being more mindful of how I speak to myself. Am I having negative self-hatred to myself? Am I uplifting towards myself? And by being more mindful of that, I can practice more self-compassion and a lot more encouraging thoughts for myself that will eventually develop my motivation, develop my self-esteem. And there's actually a specific exercise that I like to do to practice self-compassion and self-awareness is to write a letter. Write a letter to yourself, but act as if you're writing it to someone else. Because sometimes folks have a easier time to write letters to other people because they're a lot more kinder. There's not that self-hatred talk that's coming up. And by writing a letter to a loved one that is essentially yourself, you can start to practice self-compassion. Other ways to practice self-compassion is a physical aspect as well. So we can learn to love our bodies by being good to them, by hydrating them, by hugging ourselves. I think, especially nowadays during COVID, we don't get that physical touch that we need. And so we should hug ourselves. We should place a hand on my heart, on your heart, or whatever it needs most. And we can give ourselves that gentle squeeze of self-compassion, like someone is hugging you. There's so many ways to be self-compassionate. And there are a lot of ways, especially with our bodies, how we can be a lot more compassionate towards ourselves. So I like to check in with myself and see, how am I nourishing myself? How am I treating my body right now? Am I nourishing my body right now? Am I hydrating myself? Am I stretching? Am I doing anything that is harming it? And so by asking these questions of how I treat my body, I can learn some ways of how to care for myself, which is essentially being self-compassionate. And of course, self-compassion doesn't come easy. A single self-compassion practice will not immediately change everything. We need to realize that it is definitely a journey and that we're going to make mistakes on the way. And these mistakes are okay. They're okay. I think we beat ourselves up so much over our shortcomings, and that we get hung up on those shortcomings that we stifle our growth. And so I ask all of y'all today to find a little room in your day to be self-compassionate. So I ask you, listener, what are some ways you can practice self-compassion today, your week, your month? What does your self-talk sound like today? Are you pulling yourself down? Are you looking in that mirror and not being nice to yourself? What are some ways you can be kinder today? So, my thoughts on self-compassion. It is a necessity. For all of us humans, we're doing so much in our life already, we forget to take the time to congratulate ourselves, to take space for what we've done already. And I ask you, listeners, about your thoughts on that. Is self-compassion something that you've always been aware of but have had trouble practicing? Or is it something that you haven't really taken note of and is something that you'd like to delve into today? Whatever your thoughts are, please let us know in the comments of the YouTube video that this is posted on, as well as our SoundCloud. Again, we are only available on YouTube and SoundCloud, but hopefully we'll be put on other platforms as well. So please like, share, subscribe so that we can grow as a network on Thoughts on That. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you do find that space to be self-compassionate toward yourself and others as well. We'll see you next time on Thoughts on That. Stay kind in the meantime.